does this podcast find you?
I am in Santa Monica, California.
Let's bust right into it. Your new book, Becoming You, is based on your popular class at NYU Stern, where we're colleagues. What is the core idea behind the book?
The book grew out of a sense that there was something missing for people who were coming out of college and graduate programs. It's just they had no purpose. They were taking jobs, but they weren't building lives. And this felt familiar to me because it's not like even though it's a growing phenomenon, it's not a new phenomenon. And I've thought, geez, when I was in business school, I wish I'd had a class to help me figure out what to do with my life, because I just got on the conveyor belt to consulting, and I was deciding between consulting and banking. And so I had this idea to come up with this class that would answer the question, what should I do with my life? What the F should I do with my life? And I brought it to our shared idol, Raghu, the dean at the time at Stern, and he said, let's give it a try. And so the idea was that there would be a methodology. I hate all the woo-woo BS out there telling people to live their purpose, and even worse, GAC material to live their passion, which I revile like you do. And I thought, maybe there's a methodology to help people figure out what the F they should do with their lives. Let me try it. And it went from there. And I started to do it, and it wasn't an experiment for very long because people kind of needed it.
Define purpose. Mm-hmm. Like, what if someone says, I haven't found my purpose, how do you dissect what that actually means? All
right, well, I have my definition of it. I mean, there's philosophical definitions of it. I mean, and I hear them all the time because this is the pond that I swim in, and I hear all sorts of philosophical, but I'm actually a really practical girl. I'm a really practical person. I have 4 adult children. I needed an answer for them. And so the way I define it, and you can take it or leave it, but the way I define it is that your purpose is at the intersection of your values, and nobody knows what their values are. Nobody. I mean, I've researched to prove it, but your values, which I have a really strong definition of, not virtues, values. Your aptitudes, which is your cognitive and emotional wiring, what your personality is and what you're actually wired to do. Are you specialist or generalist? And then the areas of economic growth that call you intellectually or emotionally. And in that, at that overlap, which is incredibly beautiful, rare, gorgeous real estate, that's where your purpose is. And you can get really philosophical and you can get really woo-woo about it, but that's not what I do. And if you want that, there's lots of people you should go talk to, but I'm about getting people into career paths that are not drudgery and that are not the onslaught of nihilism, which is afoot.
Professor, you open your book by saying happiness is not a goal, it's an outcome. What did you mean by that?
Well, I'm the sworn enemy of the happiness industrial complex, although I have friends, good friends who are part of it. But this whole sort of optimism peddling and sort of like you've got to chase your happiness, chase your bliss. And so I am with Mother Teresa on this one that I think happiness is really hard and very fleeting. I'm not even sure you can be happy for that long. I mean, so that's just me. And so I think sort of a more attainable goal, and one that I advise my students to go for is a meaningful, productive life, which I think is your best guarantee of happiness. I kind of like the Thomas Aquinas quote that joy is when the good you seek is fulfilled. And I think that if you are living in this territory I described at the overlap of your authentic values, again, with the caveat that you got to find out what those are, your aptitudes and your economically viable interests, you're more likely to have a meaningful, productive life. And then happiness is likely the outcome of that or the byproduct of that. But to chase happiness, it's kind of ill-advised. I want people to be happy. I mean, it's not like I'm like, the happiness bully here. It's not like I don't want people to be happy. I want people to be happy. But I'm a person who, like many people, have had everything going for you that should make you happy and not been happy, right? Because people that you love die, and other crappy stuff can happen to you, or you get a kid with anxiety or whatever. And so, since happiness is kind of a difficult thing to hold on to, why not just go for a meaningful life? And happiness usually accompanies that when it does.
Yeah.
Am I being a downer? I hope I'm not being too much of a downer here, but I'm a realistic person.
I relate to this. THC and Netflix give me happiness, but I can only do them in limited amounts. It's trying to feel a certain sense of comfort, absence from anxiety, purpose. That's the stuff that kind of sustains you. You describe in the book that there are 3 parts to becoming you: values, aptitude, and economically viable interests. Break all of that down for us. And you also talk about something called the area of transcendence. What is that, and how does someone find theirs?
Okay, so the area of transcendence is that purpose stuff that I was talking about that's at the intersection of your values, your aptitudes, and your economically viable interests. We call it area of transcendence. I used to call it area of destiny, and then I didn't like that very much. I call it area of transcendence because our old friend Maslow had the hierarchy of needs. Okay, and at the top he had self-actualization for like 14 years after he first came out with the theory. He was at Brandeis as a professor, and he called it self-actualization. That's real Oprah territory. It's fine. The problem was that I wasn't finding that that's what my students necessarily wanted. They wanted to do something beyond self-actualize. They wanted to give back. And you can say what you will about Gen Z, but they have this impulse to give back and to be connected to something larger than they are. And he actually revised his hierarchy of needs in sort of the last years of his life to say there's actually something above self-actualization. Self-actualization plus what he called cosmic connection, which is being part of something larger than yourself, is what he called transcendence. And so I call this sort of, when you find your purpose, you are in your area of transcendence. And you know what? It feels that way. Like there are moments when I'm in it, and I would say I'm pretty damn close to it most of the time, and you feel like you're going to levitate. You feel like you're exquisitely alive, and that's your area of transcendence. And it exists at the intersection of these three data sets, if you will. So the first place we go is values. And can I just be like a broken record and say my whole life has been a journey. I mean, I wrote my PhD thesis about how the journey that I went on to figure out what my values were, because I grew up in a family and I thought I must be adopted. And there was like one, because they were so different from me. And the one sort of mitigating factor on the fact that like I was convinced I was adopted is that I was the literal spitting image of my grandmother. Like you could put our faces right next to them. And then I would say, I must be adopted in this family. I would say, yeah, like look at Nana. And we were like pictures of each other. So how could this be that I was so different from my family? This was the beginning of my journey to figure out what's going on. Of course, I finally got to, we have different values. I love my family, by the way. They're fabulous. And we can love people with different values all the time. So values, big academic topic that has never somehow passed the fourth wall into the general population. And so part of my work and part of the work of Becoming You is saying, look, there's 15 human values. Everybody has a different level of them. You've got a kind of values DNA profile. What are your values? Are they achievement, belonging, beholderism, non-to-be? I mean, we've got these 15. And find out who you really are. And look, the word values has been hijacked by the political discourse. You know, Christian values, progressive values, conservative values, and everybody's afraid of values. And you're never taught what values are in school, even though they're the most important piece of data about yourself. And so the part of Becoming You is teaching people what values are completely separate from virtues, of which we should all have more, like kindness and integrity. Values are these choices that we make about how we're going to live our lives, who we're going to marry, how much we're going to work, the sort of the beliefs that we have that drive what we do with ourselves. And this is the last moment I'll nerd out on you, I think, which is that there's a whole school of research around values formation, which is how we come by our values. Like, is it trauma? Is it culture? Is it, right? There's a huge school of academic research and sociological research on how we come by our values. And I don't really care about it. I don't care how you came by your values. I think it's sort of vaguely interesting. My students are always trying to tell me how they came by their values. And I say to them, take it up with your therapist. I don't, that's not my business. My business is figuring out what your values are and helping you figure out what kind of work you should do given those values. But that's not enough. You got to know what you're good at. Because I don't care if your values are fame. If you're a really bad singer, it just doesn't make any difference. So we have 8 big cognitive aptitudes. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and there's testing for them. But I actually believe that the harder part is figuring out what our emotional aptitudes are, like what's going on with our personality and how the world experiences us. One of the hardest messages I have to tell my students is that your personality is not the words you tell yourself about yourself. Like, I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm a great listener, I'm a really good friend. Well, maybe you are. But how's the world experiencing you? And I think everybody would agree. You can be great at a job because of your personality, and you can suck at a job, pardon my French, because of your personality, but you got to know your personality. And one of the most shocking experiences for my students, and one of the most shocking parts of the Becoming You process, is when people are confronted with how the world is actually experiencing them. So you got that data set, you got your values, you got your aptitudes, and then the third data set is what are the industries and jobs within those industries that are calling you. Now, look, here's the problem. students' apertures, and everybody's apertures get smaller and smaller as they get older. You just think these are the 5 jobs available to me. There's incredible research that shows when kids come out of high school, they think there's 5 jobs, and 2 of those jobs are their parents' jobs. And then the other ones are like teacher and fireman or whatever. And then you think college would really open the aperture, but it doesn't because of groupthink. And then God forbid you should go to get an MBA, because then the aperture closes down to 2 jobs, consulting and banking. And so part of the becoming you process is just to force open that aperture. There were my sound effects on forcing open the aperture. And then you get all that data.
So you drop by their office during office hours. The bad news is the students actually believe that and they stop by. I can't imagine how many people swing by your office hours and want essentially what is kind of life coaching or therapy. And so I'll go back to when I was a second-year business school student. And if I'd taken your class, my objective was very singular, which is good. I wanted to make a shit ton of money. That was all I wanted. I had grown up without money. I was worried at that time about taking care of my mom. I wanted the accoutrements of wealth, experiences, power, broader selection set of mates. All of that really appealed to me. If I came in and said, Professor Welch, my mission here is to just be as economically viable or secure as possible, what would you have said back?
First of all, I had the exact same set of values. When I was at business school, I wasn't looking for a mate because I was already married to my first husband then, but I was driving a car where I could see the highway through the floor. And the dean of HBS came to me and he said, Susie, you're going to be an academic someday. Why don't you just stay right here at HBS and do it with us? And I thought to myself, no effing way. I'm poor and I want to be rich. And I was so poor. I had paid for business school out of pocket and I wanted to go to Bain because Bain was going to take care of my dad. And so I had the same values as you did. That's not every student. Okay. I had plenty of classmates who had money and that wasn't their concern. So if you'd come to me and you said, I want to be rich, I would have said, well, we don't need to use the values bridge to tell. I have a test that everybody takes called the values bridge, which I developed, which tells you your values, because most people have a lot of junk between them and their values. Most people don't admit they want to be rich, by the way, Professor. They don't admit it out loud. There's a little stink off of it with the youth today. But your number one value, it would have been affluence then. And probably second to that would have been, achievement, which is seen success that other people see, winning. In other words, and I would have said to you, well, you know what? You are the perfect person to go into banking or consulting. Let's see if you're good at that. Let's see if you actually have the aptitudes for those jobs. And then I would have asked you, does it in any way interest you? So my problem was that I went to Bain because I wanted to make as much money as I possibly could. I was deciding between Bain and Goldman Sachs. And because I was a Baker Scholar, Bain paid me more, blah, blah, blah. And I went there and I was okay at the work. But they ended up putting me into client services because actually I was just much better with the clients. I was just good at making rain and bringing in the business. I did it for 7 years and I made the money I needed to make. By that time I had 4 children and I had to get out of Dodge because in those days there was no partner track for people with babies. But the work didn't interest me at all. And so I would have been I shouldn't have done it. I mean, and in fact, what I didn't understand, I show this slide to my students that freaks them out. There's like a pall in the room. Okay. And let me try to describe this slide. It shows what your life looks like if you go into consulting or banking. And it shows that for the first 15 years, you're making quite a lot of money. And then sort of 15, 20 years out, your money sort of plateaus. You become partner and you kind of plateau at a certain amount. But if you go on a different route and you go into industry or you go into a job where you're unbelievably good at it, okay, you sort of at the beginning years, you're making nothing. You're making like $40,000 to their $200,000. But at a certain point, if it's your values and your aptitudes and it calls you unbelievably, there's this moment sort of 15 years out where your line rockets up and passes their line. And you have the potential to make so much more money if you actually go early on into the area that's your area of transcendence. It just takes a while. I mean, I could think of a million examples of this, but they just think they take this sort of short-term solve for their money desires and needs. And they're not ever going to get the money that they truly desire. They're private jets. They're a one helipad per child kind of money desires if they go into consulting. But they will have 2 BMWs in the garage in Greenwich, Connecticut.
There you go. So I started in investment banking at Morgan Stanley and then started a consulting company in my second year of business school. I'm curious because I'm not sure I know how to articulate this. What do you see as the primary qualifications or skills that distinguish someone who would be good in banking versus someone who'd be good as a consultant?
Let me say that I could have answered that question 6 months ago, but all those jobs are going away now anyway. I think that what's going on, what I did, look, I was 7 years as a consultant, and everything that I did can be done by AI now. Everything.
Really? You really think it's that dramatic that you think consulting firms are going to be a shadow of their human capital self, so to speak?
I think the jobs that people have in the first 5 years are going away, Scott, completely. Here's the thing is the jobs later on are not going away because a consultant with 25 years of experience has wisdom and has something, I'm rubbing my fingers together. They have something that they kind of know, like there's this pattern recognition that they've seen. They've seen the people who blow up. They've seen the mergers that don't work. You don't have that. So in your early years, you're doing all this grunt work, which can now not completely, but can, largely be done by AI and will be more and more done by AI. But the only way you get to that wisdom is to have done the junky work at the beginning, as you kind of are observing out of the corner of your eye how the real work's getting done. And so there's something's about to go on that's going to blow up both those industries, and those jobs are going to, I don't know what's going to happen. And I think that I could venture a guess about there's more ways to succeed in consulting than there are ways to succeed in banking. In banking, you just got to be very good at finance. I mean, finance is just a skill. It's a knowledge. It's a way of brain. It's a numerical reasoning kind of stuff. You can get by in consulting without that because you can be good at other stuff. But I think all the jobs. And I will further say this. I've got a ton of data on values now because 15,000 people at this point have taken the values bridge. And so we have and I can cut that data by generation. And what we're seeing is that that Gen X and Gen Z, our real youth, have very distinct top values. Their number one value is what we call eudaimonia, which is self-care, everything that feels really good. And then their second top value is voice, which is creative self-expression. None of these values are being expressed, by the way, in their consulting and banking jobs. And then their third value is what we call non-city, which is helping other people. But I did a big survey of hiring managers at banks and consulting firms, and the last thing they want are people who've got eudaimonia, voice, and helping other people as their top values. I mean, they want people who want affluence and achievement. They want the young Scott Galloway is what they want.
When are there certain, I want to come back to AI in a second, but are there certain signposts or tells as you're advancing through your 20s and workshopping your career around this is when I should leave, this is when I should switch careers, maybe I'm pretty good at this? Are there hacks or code breakers? What are the patterns you should be looking at as a young man or woman around where you're going to find your purpose?
I'm going to give you a highly technical answer. Like an uh-oh feeling is your first hack. Uh-oh feeling. Like I was a reporter in Miami. I had worked at the college newspaper, the Crimson, and I thought, well, the only thing I can really get paid for with my fine arts degree from Harvard, the only thing I can ever get paid for is writing. I was a decent writer. So I go off to the Miami Herald and I'm a crime reporter. They put me on the police desk. It's fantastic. Started every day in the morgue, would walk down the bodies at the morgue. This was very exciting. And we'd find out each person how they died. This was in the middle of the Miami Vice era. And I loved everything about it because I had so much opportunity and the people were so fun and interesting, all the young reporters. And Miami was a fantastic place to live. I lived there for a whole bunch of years when I graduated from college. And everything about it was kind of fantastic. I had a lot of opportunity because Knight Ridder had a big strike and they had fired all the reporters. So all these young reporters who came in from college, we all had a huge amount of opportunity. We're all in the city desk, so forth. But I had a big uh-oh feeling sort of 1 year in, which is I thought that reporters were mean. I thought that they were hypocritical and that every reporter I knew was filled with vices, drinking, smoking, and cheating on their spouses. And yet they were in the business of calling out sort of public officials who did the exact same thing. And then I thought, God, they're just hypocrites and they're really mean. And I'm kind of this like sort of sincere gal. And I don't like being mean. And I don't like sort of openly criticizing people when I'm the same sinner that they are. And this was this uh-oh feeling. Anyway, it took a couple of years for me to say, I'm in the wrong even though I think reporting is great, and I loved my friends there. I loved the fellow reporters that I had. They were so cool and interesting. But I had a gigantic values disconnect with the values of other reporters. Like they were lone wolves. And I'm like big on the value of belonging. Like I'm a big group girl. Like I love going to church kind of thing. Okay. And there was just a lot of values disconnect. And the way values disconnects show up is with an uh-oh feeling. And so I'd say, listen to it. Highly technical, I know.
You believe that, at least in the short run, there's going to be a lot of job destruction among these information-intensive industries, including banking and consulting. As Americans, we always like to think there's an answer, and there may not be an answer here. But if you were advising the administration or the Secretary of Commerce, or I guess the business school, on how do we prepare these kids to get past that first 5 years when there isn't going to be that apprenticeship, that training. I was in the analyst program at Morgan Stanley, and I was not very good at it. And it was so good for me, though, because it taught me attention to detail. It taught me discipline. It taught me just how unfair the corporate world was, which I think is a really important lesson. People aren't just going to like you. No one owes you a living, and you're going to have assholes and injustice the rest of your life. That's called the corporate world. What do you think? Are there solutions or safety measures we should be implementing around the way we teach these kids, or government programs, if for this destruction of first year or jobs out of undergraduate or graduate institutions? What advice would you have to soften the blow that's coming here?
I think the answer is that you have to get very good at knowing the one and only thing you'll ever know for sure in this world, and that is yourself. I think that you graduate from school and you know about everything that is unimportant and changing, and that wouldn't it be crazy pants if what you learned at school was a huge amount about who you are? I think we go into therapy and we take years to learn that, whereas there are a lot of shortcuts to where we can learn what our values are really fast. We can learn what our aptitudes are. Imagine if you just walked out of school knowing about your software and knowing what your personality was. Look, I always say your currency is your currency. Okay. The more you know about the world, the more you are valuable to an organization. And yet with all the information coming at kids today, they're like this, they're like crouching down. They don't want to hear it. Like I crowdsource in my classes. What do you read? What do you watch? Besides you, Scott, Professor Galloway, they're not watching much else. Maybe they don't need to. But like they got to be wrenching open their apertures to know what's going on in the world and see around corners. And so business school is teaching people a lot of stuff that may not be relevant 1 year after they're out. And so I think that's one thing that's got to really change. I also think I was at a conference and the great Barry Diller was speaking, and he said right now at the board level, we're riveted on finding out more about ways we can invest in the human experience, because the AI and all of its variations is going to replace everything but the human experience. Like I think maybe the only thing that's going to last through all of this is love. Like it's just the one feeling that a machine cannot replace, is that feeling when you fall in love with somebody, or that feeling of how good it feels when you're doing something with someone you love. I think there's going to be industries that grow up oddly around experiences that you can only have with another person in the room.
Yeah, I like that.
Maybe it's not true. I hope it is.
A couple of years ago, you noted a trend called fun employment among Gen Z workers. What is fun employment, and how has it evolved since then?
Maybe the first time a professor actually screamed in a classroom at Stern. I just screamed. So I was talking to my students about what they were going to do, and this one student raised her hand, and she said, "I'm going to do X, and then I'm going to have some fun employment, and I'm going to do Y." And she kept on talking, and everybody understood what fun employment was. And I said, "Wait, stop!" And I said, "What did you just say?" And she said, fun employment, the fun you have when you're unemployed. And I literally let out a scream, because I come from an era where when you're unemployed, you're unbelievably neurotic and freaking out, and you're thinking about when you're going to get your next job. And if there's nothing fun about unemployment. But this was this new notion that unemployment could be really fun, and you would just do a lot of self-carry kind of things in that period. And then you'd go back to work, which you would have some drudgery in until you went into your next period of fun employment. And so I think, look, I've learned a lot from my students, and I've stopped screaming when they teach me these notions. And I've tried to sort of extract myself from having any, and I try not to have any judgment about it. It's fine. Maybe they're right. Maybe I've been wrong my entire career, and that we should be living and thinking that way. But for me, work was life. It still is. I mean, that's all my meaning. I love work, and my career has been, and what I'm doing is really my momentum. But maybe we have a new brave new world where that's just not true. Very many people now. The data would suggest that that's true, but there are 2% of Gen Z that have the exact same values that the baby boomers have, and maybe it's going to be a bloodbath with companies fighting for those 2% who care about achievement and affluence. We'll see.
And just as we wrap up here, Professor, as someone who's obviously taught a lot about purpose and management, and also, you said you have 4 kids?
I do.
How do you bridge this, or what takeaways do you have or advice do you have for parents that you've, with the Venn overlap with sort of management and finding professional purpose and trying to be a good parent?
Parenthood's messy. I have 4 children. I'm a grandmother now. My oldest son is 36. My youngest is 30. I think for parents, the hard thing to understand, and I wish I had known it 10 years before I did, or 20 years before I did, which is that it's really hard when you realize your kids are not like you. And that's the moment of truth. And so I guess I would say is like reconcile yourself earlier in the process rather than later to understanding they're not going to be you, and then go from there.
That's really interesting. I like the way you framed that. For me, it was, maybe it's the same thing. I assumed that my kids would be so fascinated with me and they'd have this they would inherit a love for CrossFit and World War II films. And then you figure out, no, they're not into that stuff. And if you want to be a good parent, you have to get into their stuff, not expect them to be into yours.
Exactly. You got to enter their reality completely. And then it's really hard not to judge our kids. And then the moment, like I have 4 kids who have got what you might call low work centrism. And they're just not interested in work that much. It's not the center of their lives. And the moment of truth for me was when I thought, I can't get up there and teach that we shouldn't be judging each other's values and be judging my kids. And I had to say, okay, you're happy, you're healthy, you love me, you come home for Thanksgiving, all's good. Everything after that's just ice cream.
Yeah, I wish I had that self-actualization. It reminds me of this quote I just saw that just cracked me up. I have 14 and 17-year-old boys, and one's about to take the ACT. And, for a long time, they said all these tests had real cultural bias to them, which is probably true. And I remember I read this thing saying that standardized tests are inherently biased against kids who don't give a shit. That just totally cracked me up, because my son is, he's studying for it and he's focused on it, but he's not bringing, I'm sitting there going, you realize the difference between UVA and the University of Richmond is how you do on this test, right? And he's kind of like, just not that worried about it.
I had a really smart kid, my oldest kid, incredibly smart, great scholar, went to Stanford, did incredibly well there, got a job in consulting, got fired because he just didn't give a flying you-know-what. And you know what he does now? He does marketing for Dungeons and Dragons, okay? That was his passion, Dungeons and Dragons. We got so mad at him. I screamed at him so loud that my vocal cords burst. And I said, you know what? Go write the CEO at that company that makes that freaking game that you love so much. And he's never seen, whatever. So he wrote him. This is 14 years ago. And the guy looked at it and he said, we don't care that you went to Stanford. We'll put you in the basement on the phones. And he did. He started in the basement doing customer service for Dungeons and Dragons. And now he's doing marketing there. And he's in his, I had to come around to that. He was never going to come around to where I was. And things are really good now. They weren't for a few years, but they're good now.
Things are really good right now. I like that. That's a good place to end it. Susie Welch is an award-winning professor at NYU Stern, a 3 times New York Times bestselling author, and host of the podcast Becoming You with Susie Welch. Her latest book, Becoming You, The Proven Method. Let me say the quiet part out loud. Women are less sexually interested in a man oftentimes when he loses his status as a provider. I just think there's a lot of evidence supporting that, regardless of what we would like to think.
I disagree with none of that. And I don't think we can pretend that, even given that we're in the year 2025 and have made so much progress in the world, that we can fight back against millions of years of evolution in which men have historically been the providers. It's a very difficult issue.
Welcome to Prof G on Money, a special series where we're joined by one of our favorites, Morgan Housel, best-selling author of The Psychology of Money, along with his latest, The Art of Spending Money. We're taking your questions on all things money, saving, spending, and everything in between. Morgan, are we ready to bust into it?
Let's do it. Ready to go.
All right. Our first question comes from Libertas Vincent on Reddit, and they say, how do you handle income discrepancy in a relationship, especially one where the traditionally high-earning male partner makes significantly less than the female partner. How do you make sure this doesn't become a point of friction that hangs over other conversations? How do you avoid the female partner feeling like she's under-contributing in the household by focusing on her career? Morgan, thoughts?
I think the first thing to point out is that this is not really a money question. It's a marriage question, a little bit different, but a very important question nonetheless. There's a quote that I love, which is, to be in a good relationship, you need to be a very poor accountant. And what the meaning of that was, if you are constantly keeping score and saying, hey, I did the dishes, what did you do? Hey, I paid this bill, what are you doing? If you constantly wake up every morning and look at your spouse and say, what have you done for me lately? That's a very difficult way to make it work. It's a transactional relationship. The problem with transactional relationships is that life is volatile. And so if you say, look, I pay the bills, I make the money, there's probably going to come a time in the future when you lose your job or your bonus declines this year, and all of a sudden you have no value anymore. And so one of the problems with money is that it is so quantifiable. And so you can say, look, I paid $500 of bills last month. What did you do? Well, what you may have done is help put the kids to bed, read them stories, done this and that are less quantifiable. You can't put a score on it. And so I think one of the issues with money discrepancy is that it's way too hard to quantify. There are a million things that my wife does so much better than I do. She's more empathetic. She's better with the kids. She's better at bedtime stories. We could sit here for an hour and I could list the things that she's much better than I do. The thing that I do, one of the things that I do is very quantifiable, which is earning money. And I think that's a problem in relationships. And so I think if you have that issue of a discrepancy that's causing a problem in your marriage, I would again challenge you that that's not actually a money issue. It's a marriage issue, and it's a keeping score issue.
I'm in agreement with you. There is one, what I'll call, I think, caveat or footnote. And so I love what you're saying, and I preach all the time that the key to good relationships is put the scorecard away. Just decide what kind of husband, what kind of father, what kind of son you want to be, and hold yourself to that standard. And keeping score is a losing game because you will typically or naturally inflate your own contributions and accidentally deflate theirs and always feel like you're coming up short. So I agree with you, Morgan. Just decide the kind of person you want to be and aspire to be in the plus side of the column always, whether it's money or affection or logistics or being nice to the other person's parents, whatever it might be. The only thing I would add to this is that there is research showing that when the woman's earnings surpass the man's, ED drug usage triples and the rate of divorce goes up. And distinctive the world that you and I fashion and hopefully try and study to, there's just a reality that there are certain expectations around roles. And when those expectations flip for whatever reasons, or the reality does not hit those expectations, there's less sex and connection sometimes because, one, I think the man feels worse about himself and that insecurity manifests in negative ways. And two, and let me say the quiet part out loud, women are less sexually interested in a man oftentimes when he loses his status as a provider. I just think there's a lot of evidence supporting that, regardless of what we would like to think. So there is an issue here around, and I don't have a solve for it, and I'll put it back to you, Morgan, but there's definitely evidence showing that the asymmetry or when a woman begins to make more money than the man in the relationship, that issues do prop up, distinct of what should happen and we would like to see happen. Any thoughts?
I disagree with none of that. And I don't think we can pretend that even given that we're in the year 2025 and have made so much progress in the world, that we can fight back against millions of years of evolution in which men have historically been the providers. It's a very difficult issue. I do have empathy for people in that situation and how difficult it would be. And truth be told, my wife and I have not been in that position. So I don't want to say like, oh, here's how we dealt with it. So I think both those things can be true. If you are in a transactional relationship in which you are constantly keeping score, very difficult to make that work. But let's also true to that point that you just made, let's not pretend that if you're going against what has been the traditional path for millions of years, that's going to be an easy thing to overcome. Really need in that transition, and college being a transition from childhood into adulthood, which is really what it is, what you really need at that point is confidence. And I have seen so many people in today's era, it's very common today, it was less common 20 years ago, but very common today that when the child is applying for a college, when they're 17, 18 years old, the parent is holding their hand and going line by line through that application, one line after another, and doing everything and hiring consultants to do it. maybe advantageous. There's maybe data that shows that that is a good thing to do, and your child has a better chance of getting into Harvard, whatever it might be. But also, what you did to your kid is you say you can't do this yourself. You don't have the skills to fill out an application on your own. I've made this joke sometimes when dealing with those people in our own life who are applying for college, that if you cannot apply for college on your own, you're not ready for college. It's the first litmus test on whether you can do it or not. And so I understand and feel the desire to use my money to help my kids and launch them into that world. They're still young. They're not in college age yet. But I also feel like the greatest thing you can do for your 17 or 18-year-old is instill the confidence that they are able to do it on their own.
I agree with everything you're saying theoretically. I would like to set a timer for us to have this conversation again when your kid is 17 and a half.
I don't disagree with that. Absolutely.
And feeling, because here's... Okay, so we have a consultant, and my son is just submitted his apps, or his first 2 apps. And as someone in the marketplace, we all tell ourselves a lie now, that college doesn't matter. And typically the person saying that is someone with graduate degrees from Stanford and MIT and has already made their money. I still think it matters a lot. And unfortunately, and this is terrible, it also matters where you go. I mean, there's kind of 30 top 20 schools, or 50 top 30, if you will. The difference between Tulane and Harvard actually isn't that great. UT Austin and MIT, Google and KKR recruit at both those places. But the difference between kind of no-name university and one of those schools is tangible. Different network, different earnings, different brand the rest of your life. And as someone who is in that industry, and by the way, thinks it's corrupt and a cartel, I see how important it is, and I'm not going to lie. I really want my son to get into an elite school. It's really, I hate to say it, it's just too fucking important to me. I hate myself for it, but it's really important to me. And this is what happens, or this is what's happened to me. Your kid's a good kid. They do well in school. They're not freakishly remarkable. They're not building wells or have patents and pharmaceuticals. They're not captain of the lacrosse team. They play on the junior varsity lacrosse team and are just okay. And they do well on tests, but not crazy well. They get good grades, but not freakish grades. And it's different now. I could do that. I could do worse than that and get into UCLA when it had a 74% admissions rate. The admissions rate this year is 9%. And all of us begin thinking, I'm not going to get the consultants. I'm not going to put a lot of pressure on them. I'm not going to have tutoring for these tests. And then what you realize is that you don't want to disarm unilaterally. And that is, your kid is competing for a small number of spots against other people who may not be as noble as you, may not be as good of parents as you long term, but their kid gets into fucking Duke and yours doesn't. I'm going through this right now. We got pitched. There's a company that should remain nameless. It's backed by a PE firm that basically says, I'll get your kid into an elite school. And I did a call with them and my son. The guy reached out to me because he heard my kid was applying to college. And the guy reached out to me and said, we'll do this for you. And they had specialists for the testing, specialists for helping around essays, specialists for crafting your narrative, different people, part of your calendar from the age of like the end of 10th grade, beginning of 11th grade. They just start optimizing the kid to get into an elite school. $80,000. And to my son's credit, who was on the phone with me, he's like, Dad, there's no way I'm doing this. No, I'm totally uncomfortable with this. And I said, I respect that. We have hired a consultant. He teaches at a boys' boarding school. We paid him $8,000. And basically once every month, he helps review the timelines and kind of the requirements and makes sure that my kid is tracking and says, do you want me to read your personal essay? Yes, no. Okay, this is where I think directionally you're correct or not correct. Do you want me to read your supplemental essays? My son has actually been more independent. It's almost frustrating for me because I want him to get into a good school, and he is very independent. He just submitted another app last night. I never saw it. I didn't know about it. And while I respect that, it's frustrating because I'm like, well, couldn't you have just at least told me what you were saying and maybe I could coach you? I'm really good at this. But he's decided, no, I want to do this, almost entirely on my own. And the reality is when you get there, you kind of end up hating yourself and being part of the problem. What I would love is for all parents to say, we're all signing a pact, no consultants, no help, but nobody can do it. Because this is yet again another transfer of wealth from lower and middle income homes. When I applied, I don't know what your household was like. My mom was a secretary. The first time she found out I applied to UCLA was when I told her I didn't get in. She wasn't helping me or, providing tutors or calling someone on the board that was a friend of her boss's or something. She had no idea. But there are people, unfortunately, you're competing against people who have all of those things. And so it's become a keep up with the Joneses because it still matters. I don't have moral clarity around this. What I would say is talk to your kid about it, see what they feel comfortable with. But there's just no getting around it. The application process between the testing, the essays, the logistics, it's a massive amount of work. And also the kid at the same time is taking their APs, their IB tests, their O levels here, their A levels, trying to have some semblance of a social life and figure out their pecking order and the social hierarchy, the cafeteria. And then they're supposed to be applying to 12 elite colleges. And you need to demonstrate your interest by coming to the college and sending emails to your local. It is just crazy how much work there is for the undeveloped brain.
No, I think that's right. I think it's a good litmus test for whether you're ready to go to college. And I think the truth is a lot of 18-year-olds are not, and that is no fault against them. 18-year-old is not that young. If you can take a couple years off and start college when you're 20, I started when I was 20. I got a late start. And the truth was I was not ready at 18. And I look back at that.
That's interesting. What did you do?
I was a valet at a hotel in Lake Tahoe, but gap year is actually a misnomer too, because I really didn't have much of a high school education. That's a different story as well. And so I was not ready at all. I knew that I had some level of intelligence and I wanted to do it, and all of my other friends were doing it. But at 18, I was lost and I had no idea. And I look back at that, and who knows what the alternative history would have been. But if I had forced myself, or if my parents had forced myself into that college gauntlet when I was 18 and wasn't ready, it would have been a disaster. And almost what I think would have happened is I would have got there. I would have been so overwhelmed and not ready for it that after a semester or two, I would have said, this isn't for me. I'm not smart enough. I'm out of here. And I probably never would have gone back. And so the idea that I waited until I was ready and then I did it myself was very important for me, different for everyone. And I will absolutely grant you that when in 7 years, when my oldest is applying for college, I might feel very different about this, because there is a tragedy of the commons. Whereas if I stand on my moral ground and say, I'm going to make him do it on his own, he's probably not going to get into a great school. I would say, though, that and I don't know the answer to this. This is very, not that clear to me. But who would you rather hire? Someone who got into UT Austin on their own, did everything on their own, or someone who went to Harvard, but their parents hired every consultant and every advisor to get them in?
But the recruiter doesn't know that. The recruiter doesn't know that information.
Right. Yes, you don't know that. But who would you bet on if you did know that? Who would you bet on is going to make a better adult, is going to make a better employee, a better spouse, is someone who's doing it on their own? That's who I would want to bet on.
100%. I get it. And a couple of things you said really resonated. One, I really do believe, especially for men whose prefrontal cortex is just more mature than a girl's, I think gap years are really valuable, especially for boys. My son worked in a food truck this summer, and I think it was probably the best professional experience he's had. Just working with people who were English isn't their native language, showing up on time, having a boss, dealing with rude, expectant people who didn't get their lobster roll as quickly as they would have liked. It was just great for him. And I would have liked to have seen him do another year. He decided that he wanted to go to college and he wanted to figure it out. And to your point about not being ready, I showed up, I was 17. I didn't know how to handle alcohol. I didn't know how to handle the discipline of school at UCLA. I was on academic probation by the end of my first year. But I figured it out. I matured during those 4 years. And it ended up being, I think, a good thing. It worked out. It could have easily not worked out. My second week in my fraternity, I got drunk and I had very little experience with alcohol, and I was not feeling well, and I stumbled outside, fell, banged my head against the wall, and ended up in an emergency room. That's not how you want to start college. right? And it's because I lacked the maturity and the experience to be at UCLA. To your point, I think I probably could have benefited from a gap year. But Morgan, I can't wait, Morgan. How old is your oldest?
10.
Okay, in 7 years, I am so all over your ass saying no consultants, no ACT tutoring. You can't look at his or her app. Let's just let the chips fall. So we're gonna set that clock. Deal?
I don't doubt in the slightest, though, Scott, that I will fall for those pressures. You're right that it's a tragedy of the commons. If you don't do this and stand on your moral ground, your son's going to fall behind. And it's a terrible thing. I totally agree with that. Even if I went through the process of, I do this completely on my own. My parents didn't even know when I applied for college. I didn't ask them. I didn't show them. I just did it. I did it on my own. And that was so important for me. Even if I know that and experienced it, to do it to your own kids, knowing. Someone asked me about this personally, because when I got my first job when I was 16, maybe 17, and I've been a huge saver since. I've been employed every day since then, and I've saved the majority of what I made since then. And I looked back at this when I was 17. Let's say when I was 17, I saved $100, which is heroic when you're 17. That's a fortune when you're 17 years old, making $8 an hour or whatever. And let's say I invested that money, and today I invested in the S&P 500. It's worth $600. I don't know if that's true, but it's probably close to it. $600 means nothing to me today, but it was heroic when I was 17. So was that a mistake? Because I could have used that $100 to take my friends out to dinner, gone on a road trip, whatever it may have been. The answer, and maybe this is just me trying to justify that decision, is it was not a mistake at all, because the savings habits that I built when I was a teenager led me through today. And it's foolish to think that I could have had a YOLO mentality back then and then flip the switch and become a big saver when I was 30. It probably doesn't work like that. So even if the money itself was so important back to me today and it's grew into something that's not that important to me today, it created a habit that I think has given me an enormous benefit today and financial independence today. And so even if it's tempting to look back and say, I should have gone out to the bar with my friends back then and blew that $100 and had great memories and taken a road trip to Tijuana, it created a habit that has given me enormous benefit today. And therefore I don't look back and regret it. Now it's always a sense of balance. I had amazing experiences during those years. I traveled a lot, met a million different people, lived in a dozen different cities, saw the world. There was no holding back. But I think the habits that were formed back then are so important to me today.
So this is an example of, I say what you say, I didn't do what you say. And that is, Morgan and I'm going to plug both our books, have written financial literacy books. Morgan's book, The Psychology of Money, and my book, The Algebra of Wealth. My book was, I think, a bestseller for 6 months. Morgan's book has been a bestseller for like 6 years. The Psychology of Money is one of those iconic books that is sort of must reading for, I think, young people around financial literacy or just your approach to money. Morgan is absolutely right. And I'm the cautionary tale of how things can go wrong. I always made more money than my friends. I'm talented and I'm hardworking. My first job, Morgan Stanley, right out of UCLA, I was making double what all of my friends were making. When I was in the internet, it took a company public, millions of dollars, sometimes tens of millions, at least on paper. But I never really had a disciplined approach to saving. I grew up in the Valley in the 90s. There came a professional age where you're supposed to put everything back into the company. If I had taken, I'm not even saying 10%, if I'd taken 3% of my income from an early age, from 22 when I got that first job and did what Morgan espouses and what I say in my book, my businesses could have gone out of business. And by the time I was 45, I would have had several $1 million in backup. But instead, I was broke. Because I bought into this notion that you go all in on the companies you start. You're in it to win it. And by the way, the Valley promotes that ethos, or at least it used to. That you weren't allowed to do secondary sales like entrepreneurs can do now. And so I've been wealthy 3 times, which means I've lost it twice. I lost it in the dot-com implosion. All of my money was my e-commerce startups. Boom, gone. I crawled my way back, 2007, doing well. 2008, great financial recession. Again, all my money in tech stocks, boom, gone. And so the third time, I was really lucky and got financial security again, but I basically took Morgan's advice, started diversifying, investing, not swinging for the fence, making sure I was always living beneath my means. And no matter how much money I thought I had, always saving a certain amount of money, saving and investing every month. Because hope you're going to go double platinum, have a best-selling book, sell a company, go public, but assume you're not, and you don't need to. If from an early age you just start saving a little bit of money, don't let the money hit your hands. Have forced savings, comes right out of your check. You don't need to be a hero. Diversify, low-cost index funds. And when you're sitting here at my age or Morgan, who's younger, even if you don't hit it out of the park, you're just fine. And I didn't learn that. And it almost cost me bigly. And the amount of stress I had at the age of 42 when I had my first kid, and the great financial recession had just happened, and I was broke, that amount of anxiety and self-loathing was much more emotionally damaging than it was financially damaging. And what I would say to anybody is don't ever set yourself up for that sort of emotional anxiety, and do what Morgan is suggesting, and that is from a very early age, just put a little bit of money away every month.
It's always a balance, though, because I do know people who save too much and live too little. That absolutely exists. I think what's important, I've never viewed savings money as either idle cash or as delayed gratification. It's always given me pleasure today, right now, knowing that I have this independence and this backup. And I think a lot of people, the idea of saving money just feels too cautious. It feels like you're not living enough. I always felt like it was one of my most prized possessions, how much I saved so much, because I knew that I had freedom and independence and flexibility. If this job isn't working out, I can just quit. And even if I don't find another one for 6 months, it's fine. It's not a big deal. I can live wherever I want. I can go on vacations whenever I want. That level of independence was so huge. And I think we do a lot of damage to the extent, particularly for young people, when we associate savings with saving for a rainy day, when it's actually giving you something right now, like very tangible. The feeling of independence is one of the greatest feelings in the world.
Morgan Housel is the best-selling author of The Psychology of Money and a partner at the Collaborative Fund. MarketWatch named him one of the 50 most influential people in markets. His new book, The Art of Spending Money, is out now. I absolutely love Morgan and his stuff. I can find a lot of his financial advice in a lot of places. What he's able to do is connect it to humanity and happiness. That's his superpower. Anyways, Morgan, very much enjoyed this. Thanks for being with us today. If you'd like to submit a question for next time, you can send a voice request. It's a different song, and that is the earnings growth. If you look at oftentimes NVIDIA, which is kind of the infrastructure company or the safe bet, if you will, if you believe in AI, but you don't have the skills to pick out which LLM or which company or which application, the safe thing feels like you just go into NVIDIA, which seems to be powering and is, I think, 90% of the processing or 90% of the queries in AI. And people oftentimes equate it to Cisco. And people don't remember this. From 1999 to 2001, Cisco and Amazon lost 90% of their value. Cisco really never recovered. It recovered somewhat, but nothing like the rip back of Amazon. And we have what is a pretty staggering investment. In 2024, about $400 billion went into AI infrastructure, data centers, chips, cloud. Meanwhile, generative AI revenue in 2024 was about $45 billion. That's so basically a 10-to-1 investment multiple. I mean, that's staggering, right? Usually, we're spending about $10 for every $1 of revenue, which means you are anticipating an explosion in revenue, right? Revenue is projected to hit $1 trillion by 2028, but near-term monetization remains thin. U.S. CapEx now equals 6% of GDP. That's greater than the internet CapEx at the 2000 peak. And NVIDIA alone posted $27 billion in revenue last quarter, up 120% this year. That one firm dwarfs all of 1999 dot-com leaders. And that's the difference. In 2000, the valuation or the PE ratio in the NASDAQ was around 80, and the top names in the NASDAQ today trade around 32. So that's still elevated, but it's much more grounded. Is this a bubble? It may be, but the pop here will be a boom, not a sonic boom, because these companies' earnings are pretty dramatic. Having said that, if I were to guess how an economic global recession, if someone were to say in 18 months, we are in not only a U.S. recession, we're in a global recession, and said, try to guess what was the string that people pulled on that started kind of the run for the exits. If you look at current valuations of all the AI companies, built into that assumption is the following, into their valuations, that they're either going to create $1 trillion in incremental revenue over the next 3 to 4 years, or they're going to help companies cut $1 trillion in costs that will flow to the bottom line. So far, I haven't seen companies creating a great deal of additional revenue. I haven't heard L'Oreal or General Motors say, because of AI, we've increased our revenues. What they're saying is because of AI, we're confident we can reduce our costs. And they're saying this very quietly. So I think the majority, if not all of that, $1 trillion, if it happens, is going to come from cost savings. Now, what does that mean? If you think about America, 150 million people work. Let's say half of industry is somewhat immune from the impact of AI on employment, like, chiropractors, massage therapists, pipe fitters, construction. They are somewhat immune. If you go into a restaurant, whatever it might be, they're somewhat immune from AI. So let's assume half of industry probably is going to incur a devastating loss in labor or employment due to AI cost efficiencies. That leaves half the employment base, or around 75 million jobs. Let's generously say $80,000 or $100,000, including load cost per job. To save $1 trillion, that means you need a destruction, if you will, of about 10 million lawyers, consultants, bankers, et cetera, all the people who are vulnerable to AI. Okay, what does that mean? If that comes from an employment base of 75 million, you're talking about a 14 or 15% destruction in employment. And while that may not sound devastating, a 14 to 15% destruction in employment over 3 years in any industry is basically Armageddon. That means no one is getting hired. No, 1 in 7 people are getting fired. That would be really serious for the labor markets. Or those valuations got to come down by half, at least. And I'm like, your nose is perfect. Or I'm thinking about getting, a chin implant, and I look at them and I'm like, and what's interesting is this really impacts mostly the most beautiful people, in that as they become obsessed with perfection and start doing procedures that are a little, in my opinion, the bar is too low for when people get procedures, especially young people getting Botox. I'm like, trust me, folks, that stuff is coming. Wait as long as you can. I get a pico laser. I get Botox when I'm in New York. So I'm not immune from this vanity. I make the argument that, I don't know, I'm on TV a lot, so I can't look like the fucking Bride of Frankenstein. It's not easy being a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's not easy just looking mediocre. Anyways, I have a lot of stuff done, so I'm not one to talk, but a couple things. One, without seeing it, I just can't tell. If you have, a fairly awkward, weird nose, or something that could be corrected and substantially improve your physical presence and your confidence, I say do it. I think people should do whatever makes them feel good about themselves, while having some third parties validate that, in fact, it is something that other people notice, or whether they're just channeling their insecurities through some sort of weird body dysmorphia and overdoing it. 2, I would not spend money on elective surgery that is going to be debt. I think you have to save this money. I think you have to be willing to pay for it. I would do some shopping around. It's like any other market. And I'm not saying you go to Walmart to get your nose done or whatever, but I think you want to be a thoughtful consumer around this stuff and not necessarily assume that the most expensive is the best. But also, I would talk to some people. I would talk to some people you trust and say, all right, be honest with them. Are you going to spend your savings for the last 10 years to get corrective surgery on your ears that, quite frankly, other people don't really notice? This is a very personal decision. And what I have found with decisions like this is it's very difficult when it comes to your looks to read the label from inside of the bottle. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to find some people we trust and can be honest with us and say, I'm thinking about having this done. This is my financial situation. Do you think it's worth the money? Because there are probably certain things here. If you have severe scarring, and a surgeon can really help that, then I would say, yeah, if that's going to make you feel much better about yourself. But if it's going from being, on a scale of 1 to 10, from a 6 to a 6.25, and it's a lot of money, I would say, okay, work out and just figure out other ways to make yourself feel confident. I don't think there's anything wrong with surgery. I think people should do things to make them feel better about themselves. But I think this is the kind of thing where you need several third-party opinions here. And oftentimes when I don't like the way I look, I'm looking for a quick fix that will make my life better, not recognizing it's not the fact that my nose goes off to the right. I got kicked in the face playing soccer when I was in high school, and you can probably tell my nose goes to the right. And then it happened to me again boxing. And I've thought about fixing that. And I found that whenever I really get serious about fixing my nose, is quite frankly because I don't like my life. And I'm thinking that fixing my nose is going to make my life better. No, it'll make my nose maybe a little bit better. But at the end of the day, I've decided it's just not worth the money. And more than that, it's not worth the cost in terms of downtime. And at this point, I'm just going to start leaning into the ugly. That's kind of a good feeling. I'm just going to lean the next 10 or 20 years because local news now is basically where old people get their weather. And the thing that was keeping local news alive was the Local News Employment Act was politics. And because of Citizens United, where they decided that money was speech, so much money has gone into campaigns. And they thought, okay, who votes? Old people. Old people still watch local news. So the Hearst family and some other people went around buying up local news stations in swing states, knowing that every 24 months, there'd be this tidal wave, this tsunami of advertising the local news where they would reach voters. And then came Trump. And this is where, quite frankly, local news stations and people such as yourself are, quite frankly, are fucked. And that is, Trump didn't go newsy. He didn't go on local news stations, much less Fox, MSNBC, or CNN. He went on podcasts. And I think you're about to see an enormous transition or reallocation of spending out of broadcast news, cable news, into podcasts and direct response vehicles, the traditional guys, Meta and Alphabet. And we're already seeing it. So what do? Quite frankly, I just think you're thinking the right way. And that is, as long as you're there and you're making a good living, use it as a platform and try and create a flywheel. What do I mean by that? If you're a good journalist, and which probably means you know how to write, you know how to cover issues, can you write books? Can you write newsletters? Can you host conferences? Can you get a speaking gig going? Can you produce a podcast? If you want to produce a podcast, start right away because there's a natural moat. What is that natural moat? This could be the worst podcast in the world today, and 160,000 people are going to listen to it because the dirty secret of podcasting is the RSS feed. The Prof G RSS feed means that anything we put into our RSS feed gets downloaded to 250,000 iPhones that moment. And the dirty secret number 2 is that advertisers consider that a listen. So Joe Rogan, who's been doing this for 14 years, has this huge built-in moat because millions, probably 20 million people every time he puts out anything, get it downloaded onto their phone, and advertisers go, that's 20 million listens. So I think this is one of those things where you go ready, fire, aim. It is a very difficult business. Now, if you in fact break in to the top 2, 3, 500, it's an amazing business because the means of production is really inexpensive. What do I mean by that? Your local news station, as little as they're paying you, costs a lot of money because it's probably union. They have cameras, they have office space, they have a van with a satellite link up. They have some older dude they have to pay a lot of money to, although that's going to change. They have producers behind the camera. I mean, it's just that shit, the means of production is expensive. The ultimate example, Stephen Colbert going from 200 people to probably 8 when he goes to a podcast, going from 60 million in revenue to 20 million. He'll still make 10 million a year, but the 192 people that don't make it out of the podcast arc from his show are going to be getting their real estate license. So this is what you want to be thinking about. If you're really committed to journalism, you got to build a flywheel. Is it newsletters? Is it speaking gigs? Is it a book? Is it a podcast? In sum, I'm not here with a message of hope, but you're thinking the right way. And I'd be thinking, should I be writing a book? Should I be writing a news column? Should I be trying to figure out a really interesting rap on a certain angle and get gigs hosting and speaking at conferences? Should I be thinking about a podcast? But you're smart to be thinking this is one part of the flywheel, but it's not going to sustain a growth career. It is, you would much rather be good in an industry that's growing, which is podcasting. Books are actually holding their own. Events are growing. Than great in an industry that is melting, which is the industry you're in right now. I apologize I'm not more optimistic. What I will say is that you're thinking the right way. Appreciate.
Let's check in on yesterday's market vitals. The major indices declined amid a broad tech sell-off. Software companies weighed down the market after Anthropic released an automation tool for legal work. The tech drawdown hit Bitcoin as well, dragging it to its lowest level since November 2024. Meanwhile, Disney shares slid again after the company named Josh D'Amaro, chairman of the Experiences division, as its next CEO. By the way, Rich Greenfield predicted that on our episode yesterday. And Netflix shares fell as the Senate antitrust hearing on the Warner Brothers deal kicked off. A couple of stocks bucked the downward trend, Walmart rose as much as 3% and joined the $1 trillion market cap club. And Palantir gained more than 6% after reporting record revenues and profits for the past quarter. Outside of the stock market, gold and silver pared some of their losses. And finally, oil rose after the US shot down an Iranian drone headed towards an aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. Okay, what else is happening? Elon Musk's empire is consolidating. SpaceX has acquired xAI, creating a combined entity worth $1.25 trillion. That makes it the most valuable private company in history. Musk is calling it, quote, the most ambitious, vertically integrated innovation engine on and off Earth. And the logic behind the deal is bold. It is a bet on space-based data centers, which Musk believes are, quote, obviously the only way to scale AI. The all-stock deal comes just a week after Musk announced that SpaceX will go public later this year. Okay, here to discuss the deal, we are speaking with one of the reporters who actually broke this story, Ed Ludlow, co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg Television. Ed, thank you very much for joining us again on Prof G Markets.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and big story.
Big story. So I guess just tell us the basics. You were the one who broke this. SpaceX and xAI merging together. What do we know so far?
Yeah, it's an all-stock transaction that values the kind of entire entity at $1.25 trillion. The SpaceX bit, $1 trillion. The xAI bit, $250 billion. But there's like some structural things that are important, which is that xAI basically operates as a subsidiary of SpaceX, which is important because SpaceX is subject to ITAR rules, right? Rules that govern the use of technology in defense applications. And so like my understanding and our reporting is that, you know, even though they're now combined, xAI kind of continues to operate independently as its own company.
How does this change things for the IPO? Because obviously SpaceX is going to be the biggest IPO of the year, one of the biggest of all time. Does this change things there?
Isn't that the $1.5 trillion or more question?
Right.
You know, our reporting and our understanding is that the work continues for SpaceX and now the combined entity to do an IPO. In the summer, we had reported it would be at the midpoint of this year. And while like out there from the sell side, from lots of people that follow these companies closely, there are still questions about whether it happens. The ultimate rationale behind this, right, is data centers in space. And at the time that we broke the story on why SpaceX would go public, and its motivations for needing to raise tens of billions of dollars, it was quite simple that there is an ambition in place for space-based data center infrastructure, but somebody's got to buy the GPUs, right? That's the kind of fixed cost. And based on our reporting in the days around this, all of that is still holding true.
So this data centers in space thing, which, yes, that is what they've said. He wrote, the idea is space-based AI. That's the only way to scale. So could you just break down what that is? That is literally, let's take these data centers that exist on the ground, and instead of having them on the ground, we're going to have them in orbit in space because there's not enough space in the ground. I mean, why do we need to put data centers in space?
To Elon Musk's mind, literally, you know, pardon the pun, there's more space in space. You know, the simple way that Musk explains it is that right now, the limiting factor for scaling AI on Earth is energy, right? You know, there's a great burden on grids across North America and other countries and other jurisdictions. Water consumption is an issue, impact on communities, and literal space to build the data centers. If you put a data center in the form of a satellite and put it into orbit, the energy question is solved by solar to the mind of those advocating for this. You have to handle cooling and space is a vacuum, and to the mind of the engineers working on it, that's easily solved. And you have plenty of real estate, let's call it, in space to build on. And that is the vision that Elon Musk is pitching here. It's a horrible term when you're a financial news journalist, but what we're talking about basically is vertical integration, deeper vertical integration, right? Starship provides the rocket that carries these satellites into orbit and deploys them. They are data centers to all intents and purposes. XAI has trained the models, but also those models need to be run, inference, which you guys know. That is all outlined in the public comms that SpaceX and XAI put out there, but also the internal comms that we've reported on around this too.
As I am somewhat of a Elon Musk skeptic, and as the Musk skeptic, my view when I see this is he's saying that the idea is that we got to put these data centers in space. How do we do it? Don't ask too many questions. The idea is we'll get there. We'll figure it out. At the same time, XAI is a company that is competing with the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic, these companies that are burning through billions of dollars in cash and are having to raise billions of dollars in cash. And XAI is itself burning, I believe, $1 billion a month. And so when I see this, my initial reaction is, this is the saving grace of XAI. If things are looking difficult over at the AI company, well, then why not just roll it up into the bigger company, which perhaps has more cash to play with to invest in the AI models and training? Is that too cynical? What do you think of that perspective?
There are lots of investors and people in the markets that are skeptical about the financial rationale for this arrangement, combining private XAI with private SpaceX. And what we had also reported last week is that Elon Musk had looked at two distinct scenarios. One scenario involved SpaceX combining with Tesla, which is, of course, a public company. Bloomberg has reported that XAI is burning $1 billion of cash per month. And on a quarter basis, you can put that in aggregate. It also has a large debt burden, which is now on the balance sheet of SpaceX, technically. Those that would push back against those concerns would say, well, we also learned quite a bit about SpaceX's financials. Revenue is growing, with Starlink now a majority contributor, as opposed to launch being a majority contributor. And on an EBIT basis, at least, it is profitable. And so they're not concerned about SpaceX needing to service the XAI debt or account for the losses at the XAI unit. But again, the public commentary from SpaceX and from Musk is that this is about deep vertical integration. It makes the use of the talents and resources of both companies to the maximum effect, which is AI development, whether that's here on Earth or up in space.
So Ed, I know you've been looking at this for a long time, reporting on it, observing what's happening, and your job is to be objective on both sides. I would love to know what you think the real motivation is, because it seems like there are two things at odds here. There's the financial picture. You bring up the amount of cash they're burning. You bring up the debt picture at XAI, which is, a question. And then there's the deep vertical integration pitch, which is coming from SpaceX. And they're probably saying, no, it's not about the financials. It's because there are synergies here on the business side. What do you think? What is the true, strongest primary motivator for Elon Musk to merge these two things together?
Yeah, and none of this is that big a surprise. It's kind of consistent with what we've called Elon Inc., right? Elon Musk has many ventures. They've always had historically close engineering and financial ties, right? There have been engineers that have worked on materials at Tesla and worked at SpaceX. Some of the results of SpaceX's more recent success, like the heat shielding on Starship, a lot of Tesla engineers touch those hands. A lot of Tesla engineers were the reason that XAI could build its data centers in Tennessee so quickly. This kind of intercompany cooperation is not new. The financial part is also not that new, right? XAI has been a buyer of Tesla's energy products. From Tesla's earnings recently, the company disclosed a $2 billion equity investment in XAI. It's all kind of linked. Last August, we did this as the cover of Business Week magazine. 6 months into the Trump administration's term in office, what was it that Elon Musk was trying to get out of being in and around the White House, working with Doge? And it was that a lot of the priorities that he had for his different companies were kind of aligned all around AI, and having proximity to that administration allowed him to try and influence things that would help those priorities. But yeah, it is AI at the end of the day. Tesla has hard pivoted away from cars. It now needs, to develop the software part of AI for autonomous driving and the Optimus humanoid robot program. XAI, per the regulatory filing in the week, it's not just a financial investment that Tesla's made. They have a framework to now share and work on the technology. So fast forward, the future is that all of these companies kind of work in parallel. What will the space data centers actually be doing? Inference in space, right? Running inference on Optimus, or running inference on models that are underpinning something else, be it the robotaxi network. It's kind of been hiding in plain sight a little bit.
Do you think ultimately they'll merge with Tesla? I mean, the way you describe it, Elon Inc., it's a good point. They're all kind of collaborating. It seems as though maybe the ultimate goal is, just roll it all up into one company. How likely do you think that is?
Yeah, our reporting is still that like this SpaceX XAI combined entity is going to do an IPO later this year. But actually, loads of people's immediate reaction to the news was, okay, Tesla must be next. Fold Tesla in some way. People just think that is the logical step to make. When we did the August edition of Business Week, it was well reported, and in conversation with all of these sources in close proximity to the companies and Elon Musk, there is a perception, a realization that if you took these massive companies and tried to fold them into one conglomerate, in any environment, that would be tricky. Regulators would look at it for one reason or another. The mechanics of it would be difficult. And again, I go back just to the reporting about the two options that we believe were looked at: SpaceX plus Tesla, or SpaceX plus XAI. And in the first instance, they went with SpaceX plus XAI. But there were a body of SpaceX investors, with a meaningful footprint on the cap table that looked at it, and to them, the Tesla combination made a lot more sense than the XAI one did, not just because of the sort of
$50 billion to fund its cloud infrastructure. It launched the first part of that financing on Monday with a $25 billion bond sale that actually drew record demand. But enthusiasm quickly turned to concern as questions resurfaced about a related matter, specifically NVIDIA's investment in OpenAI. As a reminder, back in September, NVIDIA announced it planned to invest up to $100 billion in OpenAI. However, CEO Jensen Huang recently clarified that figure was, quote, never a commitment, and it appears that the investment has stalled. That poses a serious risk for Oracle, as roughly half of its $625 billion in future revenues are made up of spending commitments from OpenAI. So the question is now louder than ever. Will OpenAI be able to pay up? In total, Oracle stock has fallen roughly 10% since Sunday night. All right, here to walk us through what is going on at Oracle, we're speaking with Gil Luria, Head of Technology Research at D.A. Davidson. Gil, thank you for joining us again on Prof G Markets.
Thanks for having me.
So there are a lot of moving parts here. Oracle says that they're going to raise $50 billion worth of debt and equity. They go out and they raise the debt successfully, but the stock is sliding down around 10% in the past couple of days, and it seems to all have to do with OpenAI. Can you just give us the play-by-play? What on earth is going on with Oracle right now?
No, you're exactly right. There's just a lot of moving pieces, especially the last couple of days. So let's just start with the fact that all of software is down a lot. And more than all of Oracle's cash flow comes from its software business. Let's not forget that. Oracle is mostly, almost entirely, a company that sells database software, enterprise resource planning software. That's where they get more than all their profits. And right now, the market feels like software is just a bad idea in general. So that's been happening at once. And then you have the fact that they're raising capital, and then they said that this is all the capital they're going to need this year. That's good. The fact they were able to do at least part of the debt, we're not sure they're done, but at least part of the debt, that's good. Then you start getting into some of the other challenges. One is, that's it for this year. But for them to be able to build the capacity that they promised OpenAI, they're going to have to do this again next year and probably again the year after that, meaning raise another $50 billion next year and the year after that. What's happened is, if you look closely at this debt issuance, it was not cheap. The rating agencies gave their secure debt, the senior secure debt, a BBB- rating, which is to say just above junk bond status. This is a 50-year-old company that is now issuing debt almost at junk bond rates. So that's not good. They won't have any cash to pay that debt down. They're going to have negative cash flow this year. So a year from now, when they need to go back to the debt markets, that's going to be junk bonds. So even higher yield, higher interest expense. To add insult to injury, there's also the equity offering. They're doing what's called an at-the-market offering. That means that instead of doing a full issuance overnight, they're going to sell a little bit of stock every day. And our back-of-the-envelope math, and I can walk you through it, is that that's probably 10 weeks of them selling 10% of the daily active trading volume every trading day. So that's going to keep putting pressure on the stock, possibly for the next 10 weeks. So those are some of the puts and takes here in what is a very dynamic, complicated situation.
And where does OpenAI fit into all of this? Because there was reporting that OpenAI had this deal with NVIDIA that maybe isn't as secure as people once thought. And then Oracle puts out this really fascinating statement. They say, quote, the NVIDIA OpenAI deal has zero impact on our financial relationship with OpenAI. We remain highly confident in OpenAI's ability to raise funds and meet its commitments. And then that statement goes viral. And everyone's kind of laughing and pointing fingers at the statement and at Oracle right now. So talk a little bit about how OpenAI fits into this slightly ugly picture for Oracle.
Yeah, well, then there's all that. And that tweet was also unfortunate. That would do protest too much, right? And this is what a corporate account should be tweeting. I would take a look at that, and I am not sure what the instructions were. But we've talked about the fact that Oracle is raising all this capital to build data centers for OpenAI. So Oracle has to raise a lot of capital to build data centers for OpenAI. For OpenAI to be able to pay for this compute capacity, they need to raise a lot of capital as well. And in fact, if you think about where Oracle stands in line, it's important to see how much OpenAI can raise. If they can't raise enough, Oracle's not getting paid. Because Oracle's probably third or fourth in line in terms of who OpenAI is going to get paid, who OpenAI is going to pay when they raise the capital. If OpenAI doesn't raise enough capital, only Microsoft gets paid. Maybe Amazon. Oracle has to hope that OpenAI raises $100 billion or more to be able to afford its grand ambitions, which include this OpenAI capacity. So one company raising debt at almost junk ratings in order to build capacity for a startup, a money-losing startup, that's still struggling to raise capital so that it can pay for it. We've talked about this. This is bubblicious behavior. This is not okay. This is unhealthy behavior. It may still work out because this AI stuff is great, but it's very, very risky type of situation for both companies.
And it's really fascinating how it all kind of ties back to NVIDIA, because it was all about NVIDIA investing the money into OpenAI, and then that's the money they're going to use to pay Oracle. But there was this fascinating interview with Jensen Huang, which I would love to get your reactions to. He was asked about this $100 billion commitment deal that was talked about with OpenAI. He was asked about what's going to happen with that, and this is what he said.
There was never a commitment. They invited us to invest up to $100 billion. And of course, we were very happy and honored that they invited us, but we will invest one step at a time.
It seems that he's kind of frustrated in that video, that people are saying that, oh, you're gonna invest $100 billion, and he's saying, no, that's not what's happening. I would just love to get your reactions to how he sounded and also what he said.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on there too. So first of all, that $100 billion that was talked about a while ago, that was really just a framework for what I would call a rebate. NVIDIA agreed with OpenAI, for every gigawatt of capacity that you get out there, we'll invest $10 billion at your current valuation, which at the time was $500 billion. OpenAI hasn't even deployed a gigawatt yet, so they haven't gotten that first $10 billion. So that was a framework. And I understand that Jensen's saying that. By the way, the conversation now is for NVIDIA to actually invest tens of billions of dollars actually at this level, not as a rebate. as is the discussion for Microsoft and Amazon and to also invest in OpenAI. So again, it is quite possible that OpenAI raised this capital, but there's a lot of noise. And the last couple of days, there were news items about NVIDIA being frustrated with OpenAI, spreading itself too thin in terms of the businesses it's deploying, in terms of the chips that it's buying. So there was frustration in NVIDIA. And coincidentally or not, there was a leak from OpenAI that they're frustrated with NVIDIA's chip performance. So a little bit of childish conflict here. But at some point, the adults are in the room. NVIDIA has a very significant interest that OpenAI does well, right? Remember, if there's no OpenAI, there's no Anthropic, everybody's using Google TPUs. So NVIDIA needs OpenAI to do well, and it has the capital to invest, as does Microsoft, as does Amazon. So it is likely that those three will fund the continued expansion of OpenAI at least this year. But if you can imagine that if NVIDIA invests in OpenAI, there are strings attached. There's no more discussion of other chips, and there certainly will not be communication out of OpenAI about NVIDIA chips not performing. So that's where we're at. A little bit of middle school drama, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of incentives going around to make sure that the investment continues.
The debt picture that you described at Oracle in concert with the capital problem over at OpenAI and the fact that they need more money to spend on these commitments than they actually have, it's all very concerning. It just like very flashing bright red signs when you hear that. We were, when Oracle, a couple of years ago, when Oracle started to position itself as a real AI player, we were quite bullish on the company, and that actually, paid dividends going forward. But it's now getting to the point where there are so many red flags here. Do you think that this is just a company that investors probably shouldn't touch at this point? Are we getting into a territory that is genuinely dangerous if you're buying Oracle, or is it safer than I'm portraying?
No, it is risky. And let me just put it in context. Oracle is still trading at 20 times forward earnings on what looks like low teens growth next year. Salesforce is going to grow low teens growth next year. It's trading at 16 times. Adobe is going to grow low teens next year. It's trading at 12 times. So Oracle, again, given where we are on software, Oracle is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. They have good business. The baseline database business does generate a lot of cash. The baseline Oracle cloud business was okay. It was growing fast, not very profitably, growing fast. The AI part of the business, the AI compute part of the business, appears to be such low margin that it's not even clear that they should be investing in it. And yet again, to your point, they just borrowed a lot, and they're issuing at least 5% of their shares in order to fund this, which again may grow their revenue a lot, but may not add any profit anytime soon. Certainly not any cash flow anytime soon. So very risky, especially compared to much better software companies that are trading at a lower multiple right now.
Okay. Those $100 billion that NVIDIA was going to commit to OpenAI, whatever that means, that is now, quote, on ice. But what might be even more interesting is the extent to which Oracle has been implicated in all of this. And even more interesting than that is perhaps what Oracle said about it. This was the public statement from the official Oracle account on X, which I said to Gil. They said, quote, "The NVIDIA OpenAI deal has zero impact on our financial relationship with OpenAI. We remain highly confident in OpenAI's ability to raise funds and meet its commitments." There are several things that are striking about this. Number one, why is a large corporation commenting on a third-party deal with which they are not involved? That is kind of strange. Number two, why do they feel the need to say anything about it? And number three, why bring more attention to this deal than it already has? These are all the questions that everyone's asking themselves. It's the questions that I'm asking myself, but I'm only asking them because Oracle posted about this. If Oracle hadn't said anything, then perhaps we wouldn't be asking these questions, but they did. And so now we are. And the answer to those questions is quite obvious. They're saying these things because they are worried about them. When they say this has no impact on our relationship with OpenAI, that's how you know it does have an impact on their relationship with OpenAI. When they say they're highly confident that OpenAI will meet its commitments. That's how you know they're not highly confident that OpenAI will meet its commitments. This is public relations 101. This is what is known as the Streisand effect. And that is whenever you try to suppress or downplay an issue that you don't want lots of people talking about, all that happens when you do that is it makes people talk about it even more. And this is the perfect example. That statement, that press release, received 5 million views on X. To put that into perspective, that is more than double the primetime viewership of Fox News. And no, people were not saying it was a good statement. It wasn't going viral for that reason. People said it was a bad statement. They were trolling Oracle. They were saying how embarrassing it was. And crucially, in the hours after that statement was published, Oracle stock fell 6%. So this should be a learning moment in public relations. I think companies need to remember that business is now more popular than ever as a form of entertainment. It is a sport now. It is a series. You, Oracle, are now part of the show. And so what that means is when you screw up, like they did, the stakes are a lot higher because everyone is watching. Everyone is interested in how this plays out. Now, I don't know who made the call to post that statement. It seems to have come from someone potentially higher up in the company. But if you're running a $500 billion company, which Oracle is, you need to be better. The language needs to be way less defensive. It needs to deal with these concerns a lot more delicately than it did. And most importantly, someone should have asked, do we really need to post this? And the answer should have been no. Maybe 10 years ago, people wouldn't have noticed this, but the year is 2026.